Welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. This Tuesday is super. Thanks for asking. It is Super Tuesday, which has always been an exciting time. But it's funny because it loses some of its luster when politics and campaigning are always incessantly chaotic, which is the case between President Trump and Nikki Haley and President Biden and his own mental faculties. Those are who our remaining candidates seem to be fighting at this stage of the game. So on the Republican side, there are 15 states that will be voting this Super Tuesday, from Alabama to California. And although former President Trump will get a vast majority of those delegates, Nikki Haley has 43 and President Trump has 273, something like that. The former president needs just about 1250 in order to secure the nomination. The earliest he could do that would be next week. Probably not going to happen today mathematically, but it could happen in the very near future. And I don't think he's very worried about it. Republicans know where the chips have fallen. The question now for Nikki Haley is, how does she get out of the race? And a lot of people have been looking at her, trying to figure out what is her long game, because as she has alienated a lot of Trump voters and the former president himself, because the longer she stays in, the more time he has to attack her, and the more pointed those attacks grow, the less likely it is that those two shake hands and call a massive truce so he can be her VP pick. I don't think that's going to happen. I do not foresee that, because there are so many factions who are aligned against Nikki Haley. The fact that she has foreign policy experience, she seems to be a moderately tempered person, somewhat politically moderate, although there are those in the peaceful faction of the Republican Party that see her as being way too much of a warmonger. Non-Democrat Tulsi Gabbard took that argument to Hillary Clinton and derailed her campaign, and as well as Kamala Harris. And she is making the same charge effectively against Nikki Haley. So the question is, why is she still in? It's because she has a lot of cash from anti-Trump, very rich Republicans who want Republicans to ascend to the presidency once again. And they want anyone but Trump at this point. And since Florida Governor Ron DeSantis totally cratered, she was the last best hope of their version of the party. That has not manifested. So now she has to get out. How does she do it? That will be a tricky thing for her to make peace with the former president. I don't think that even if he pulls her back into the fold, it will not be with the vice presidency and a cabinet post. It will be a begrudging peace, and she probably will do what Ted Cruz and Chris Christie did after their 2016 drubbing, which was to re-enter the fold and back the future president at that point, who had lambasted them as well. So Trump will not be the nominee after tonight, but he has had a couple of favors blow in his direction, as you know. One, the Supreme Court decision, the 9-0 decision, which is being completely dismissed by the hysterical left, including the usual suspects who are lacking brain matter, but not vociferousness. That's Keith Olbermann and Whoopi Goldberg. They're both trashing the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not there to win friends. They don't need liberal pundits to like them in order to do their job. Their job was to look at the landscape and realize that no matter how much you hate someone, just because you hate him doesn't mean, if you are in a position of power, if you are the Secretary of State in a place like Colorado or Maine, that you can keep the person you hate off the ballot because they have engaged in behavior that you think, you feel is treasonous or insurrectionist. The former president was not charged with insurrection. That is a very important point. And now, because he can get on the ballot in these states that were considering withholding him because of his behavior on January 6th, they cannot do that because it is not the job of the states to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which is what they were trying to do. Of course, there were 3 liberal justices who, even though they agreed with the majority decision, they did not agree with the spirit of the decision. And they took issue with the fact that Congress has way too much power to determine how Section 3 can, in fact, be enforced, and taking all of that power away from the states. That was one Supreme Court ruling. The other is the fact that the Supreme Court will hear whether or not a president has full immunity during his time in office, and can he be charged with criminal offenses during that official time. Uh, the former president says, no, I'm immune. I was doing my job. Special counsel Jack Smith sees it very differently. And now that they have punted a little bit in their timeline, they will hear oral arguments in April. That means it's probably going to be a couple months after that until they reach an official decision. And that will more than likely push that federal case after Election Day in November. So those two things do sort of operate as a momentum shift for the former president, but it's really not the Supreme Court deciding who the next president is. That is up to voters. And so voters overwhelmingly, this weekend, there were 4 polls showing that Joe Biden is not doing well. In fact, worse and worse with voters who, in a New York Times poll, he is now 4 points behind President Trump in some very important and close states in this presidential race. Of course, it's only March. The election is not until November. And as we know, as we have become addicted to the chaos, so much can happen between now and then. But it is very likely those two will square off, which kind of sucks that we have a rematch of 2020. And, the former president, he has flubs, he has brain freezes. They are nothing in comparison to the whoppers and stumbles that Joe Biden shows us on a semi-weekly basis. But that is what it looks like we will be left with. Momentum is shifting away from Joe Biden. So if people like Whoopi Goldberg and Keith Olbermann are mad at the Supreme Court, they should be mad at the Democrat Party for not allowing a primary challenge against a sitting president who has to sit because he can hardly walk. It's barely a slow shuffle at this point. So shame on the party for not opening it up to a few challengers for the good of the country, if not the party itself, because his faith in him is eroding faster than some of the policies that are more important to Americans, faster than those are shifting.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
So immigration is now the number one issue facing voters, and that's because it is no longer an issue that simply plagues the Southwest. It's not just people in Texas, Arizona, and California who are dealing with immigration and, the massive flow, which cannot be contained because Kamala Harris is too busy looking for root causes. But that has actually shifted the Senate race in California. So tonight we will see whether or not the congressional careers of Barbara Lee and Katie Porter come to a screeching halt. Katie Porter, of course, won that Orange County House seat. And, against all odds, the soccer mom who was very oddly ungracious about the murder of Laken Riley when she was killed by an illegal migrant from Venezuela who brutally murdered her. And Katie Porter tried to dismiss that and say, well, yeah, it's tragic, but, we really can't talk about whether or not the person was in the country illegally. No, but, for someone who comes into the country illegally, if you look for a better life and if you try to work and make this country better, you can stay. If you come to this country and you steal things and you're violent and you are a threat to society, you must go back to from whence you came before you murder someone. Pretty easy, basic rules that can still be pro-immigration. The point is, Katie Porter is now not going to come in second in that California Senate race. So in these races in California, these primaries, they do not differentiate by party. The top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, are the ones that go to the general election. So you have Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, and Steve Garvey, the former MLB player who played for the Dodgers and the San Diego Padres. So he is now in first place. A Republican is beating Adam Schiff, who has been the top polling candidate and also the top fundraiser in the state. Very expensive ad markets in places like San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, if you haven't heard of them. So you do need a lot of money if you're going to break through, especially when you have multiple candidates with a lot of coverage and name recognition. So that's Adam Schiff has been able to do that, but he's losing to Steve Garvey at this point, and that is because of immigration. And it's interesting because there will be a lot of people who come out and vote for Steve Garvey, who is running as a Republican, because a lot of people will vote in person, particularly those inland voters in places like Fresno and Bakersfield, and of course, Orange County, which has the highest concentration of Republican voters. They will come out, and the nostalgic older voters who vote reliably and in person, his name recognition resonates most with those voters. So he should do pretty well tonight, and that will end Katie Porter's career. Not soon enough. I'm absolutely fine with that. California should be interesting again. If California were to save itself electorally, they would divorce themselves from the monoparty state that has been created and corrupted there by the Democrat Party, and they would allow for ranked choice voting and proportional representation that would completely remake the electorate in the state, and it would be a much more honest expression of how people are voting and what constituents want from their elected officials if they did have proportional representation. Obviously, it would also be great for independent voters, libertarian voters, Green Party members, and a host of independent voices who still live in California, but they are smothered to death by the Democrat Party, who work very, very hard to make sure that they have a totalitarian stranglehold on the rest of the state. Does it mean Steve Garvey is going to win in November? No, probably doesn't, because there are twice as many Democrat voters in California than Republican voters. It just depends if immigration stays as bad as it is, because not only have you created a climate where it's unsustainable, you already have so many homeless people in California unhoused, and so many homeless veterans. Shame on you. Local governments who have done virtually nothing to take care of the people who have fought for this country over decades of endless wars. You have completely failed the state and workers there who are now competing with jobs with people coming into this country. And if you want to work, create a competitive market and better the lives of everyone and have that rising tide lift all boats, that's fine. But California is sinking under its own deficit. And now somehow they're going to pay for more people to come across the border, incentivizing even more illegal immigration by offering Medicaid to everybody. And that is an impossible task, because as the welfare state grows, the quality of life diminishes. And that is because there is a finite amount of resources with big companies like Tesla and SpaceX leaving the state for good. Good Super Tuesday to you all. We'll see how it all shakes out. Things are certainly going to be even more interesting between now and November. And could Steve Garvey be the next California senator? Well, we've seen crazier pitches in our time. And I think that we should all be prepared for some wild balls. This has been Kennedy Saves the World. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.